Hey everybody, my name is Sam. I'm the co-founder of zenGate Global, and today I'm joined by Theo, the head of business operations at zenGate Global, and our special guest, Darrell O'Donnell. Today is the first of the Fireside Chats by the zenGate Global team. It's really an opportunity to speak with some of the experts that we work with day to day. And today we're joined by Darrell, the founder and the CEO of Continuum Loop. He's got deep expertise in the ecosystem building and the ecosystem governance space. We're super excited to have you, Darrell. Thank you for joining. Thank you very much.
I'm glad to be here, Sam.
So in this series, we'll be speaking to a lot of different experts. Theo will be the moderator. We're hoping to have different experts from different sort of fields that we're working across, whether that's in the tea industry, regional domain, regulation, technology, and whatnot. Today's focus is on minimum viable ecosystems and also just learning a little bit about Darrell and his background and so how he got to a point where he's working with us. So Chef, I'll hand over to you to kick things off.
Yeah, we're going to have a very interesting conversation around the minimum viable ecosystem, but more importantly, about Darrell, getting to know you. And I'm pretty sure we're all going to have the opportunity to learn a lot of things from you through this fireside chat that we're going to do today. So, Darrell, if you don't mind, starting with your background and tell us a little bit more about yourself and who you are.
Sure. Thanks, Theo. Yeah, I come from a kind of an odd background, run a few startups, sold the first one, sank the second one. But what I looked back on and realized is I was doing this decentralized thing before it was really had a term. My first company, we were doing international search and rescue. And actually that software, I mean, we sold the company way back, probably before you were born, Sam, back in 2000. We sold that, and that software is still used around the world to manage search and rescue incidents. Some of the code I wrote is still running wild 23 years later, which is kind of freaky, considering I don't code anymore. I hire good coders. But what was interesting about search and rescue is that there's no one in charge. Every country is wildly different, and even inside of a particular search and rescue region, the who's in charge and who owns what, really, the search and rescue guys don't own anything. They don't control anything. They have to kind of beg, borrow, and steal. So they operate in a really informal, yet, they get a lot of stuff done, which is really kind of a decentralized approach. We then shifted on to working with, pretty wide range from on the ground warfighters, Army, special operations, through to emergency management, crisis management. Again, groups that are not typical command and control hierarchy. They're running in a very decentralized way. We then created a whole bunch of advising companies, including governments. In Canada, we have a group called Center for Security Science. In the States, they would call that Department of Homeland Security, Science and Tech. I was working for them and created a system that it was funny because more American agencies joined it than joined the American equivalent. Part of that is because we did not have a top-down federal government says X, therefore you will do X. We had a very decentralized approach to sharing information. This became in Canada, the system is now used to, it sort of morphed into the system it's used now to warn for tornadoes, earthquakes, Amber Alerts, that kind of thing. I got pulled into the crypto realm, blockchain realm, when we started working on what's now sometimes called self-sovereign identity. We met through the Itala Prison Program, which is the IOG product, which is SSI, Decentralized Identity. But I got involved in the very, very beginning of it, even before the term really existed, because all of my companies, we had a serious problem in that identity was probably 10, 15, 20% of our development cost, because we were just weird. It was just a weird organization. We had people coming in who were not part of the formal organization, and identity was really expensive. And we realized that since no one was in charge, it was impossible to work. You couldn't make it work until this blockchain thing came around. In which case, I was involved with the launch of Sovereign, which was kind of the OG of the SSI world. But now we're seeing that decentralized identity pattern in all of the chains. Cardano, the work that both IO is doing with Atala. I know the CF is looking at identity. It's really taking a look at how do you, make things a little bit more normal. We don't talk through Google when we talk to each other. We literally, when we meet each other face to face, don't have anybody in between us yet. Well, right now we're meeting on Zoom. We were on Google Meet earlier. When we're logging in through other systems, when we're doing, it's just a really weird way of operating. So we've come into this really strange world of, crisis critical, life critical, built out the first operational SSI system, which was for the US credit unions. It's called MemberPass, had about 20 credit unions running that. I was CTO.
Yeah, very comprehensive. And thank you, Darrell. And one of the things I wouldn't mind just touching on quickly as well, like over the last couple of months of working with you, there's been this constant theme that's emerged in terms of what I've noticed in your skill sets and your strength. And it's really, I guess the best way to put it is you love being in the chaos, but you like putting structure where there isn't structure. And your entire career seems to really seems to embrace that attitude and that way of thinking. I was just wondering if you could elaborate a bit on that, just so that others could, understand a bit more context around what you meant by that, and also like why is that such a useful skill set in the work that we do today, especially in the blockchain space?
Yeah, I tend to thrive when things are not understood. So if we look at my first day, I think it was the first or second day I quit my job. I was on fast track to partner, and I went to a meeting at what became the search and rescue company. And the whole search and rescue community said, okay, we're shutting the project down. And I looked at my business partner and said, dude, I literally just quit my job for this. Why? Turns out no one was hearing the real signal in the noise. It's absolute madness in search and rescue. You have so many things going on that you have to look, okay, what's the one or two things I could do right now to make it just a little bit better? Realize that that's kind of when I am probably in my happiest place, is when everyone else has no clue what's going on. I tend to bring a bit of order, at which point other people generally take the ball and run with it. I tend to then, help guide and nudge things along. So when we take a look at, for example, some of the work I've done in blockchain, you look at this, what's, real world assets, RealFi, real finance. There's a lot of moving parts, but only a few of them are going to make a real difference. A good classic one that I look at, and it's not related to this project directly, is everyone in the blockchain space is looking at, the technology for compliance. Compliance, I need a KYC credential. What they miss, and this is something that I learned, actually, I was hauled to the floor by a CEO of a very large US credit union, kind of pulled aside out of a boardroom and said, listen, you're technically really, really sharp. And this is what I'm seeing in the blockchain space, is lots of people have really, really deep chops technically, but they're missing the point. And I found the crux of the matter with compliance is really the following. He said, you can take the liability, you can move it around a bit, you can help me, you can improve my processes. What you cannot do is take away all of the liability, especially the criminal liability. That's when I realized, because you can't put a system in jail. Someone is going to go to jail. It's someone, yes, a corporation can be charged, but typically it's a compliance officer, or in his case, the CEO. And I realized that of all of the madness we were dealing with, it was really the part that we had missed, which was causing all of the systems that we'd put in place to just not succeed, really. They weren't failing. They just weren't really, oh my God, amazing. Was that we had missed that one little point, that it's a person that goes to jail. So when I look at the madness of people saying they have, compliant systems, compliant blockchains, there's no such thing. The SEC wants to find a person. They're not charging chains. They're charging developers. They're charging security researchers. They're charging CEOs of Ripple, for example, with various different things. Now, when I look at the kind of the madness, when I first got introduced to the Cardano community, which is a great, awesome community, I was actually dealing with one chief technology officer type who said, they don't have to worry about compliance because it's just code. to try to cut through the noise, I said to him, I said, great, that's great if you believe that, but what are you going to do when you land at LaGuardia, go to enter the States, and someone pulls you into secondary, and you don't have an answer because guess what? You were the last person to touch the code that was running decentralized, and they want someone to charge. He said, ha, 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 really funny. But I saw him about 6 months later with his general counsel on a call because he finally realized, no, there's something there. And actually, if you look at Tornado Cash, there was a security researcher unrelated to the code. They were not touching the code. They had nothing to do with the development of it, but they had done some published open research on what Tornado Cash was about. And they were pulled into secondary because their blog showed some addresses when they were actually following how they could say statistically we actually might be able to find out what's going on to Tornado Cash. They were pulled aside on the dark side, meaning that the whomever it was, I can't remember which agency it was in the US, pulled them over. He managed to get lawyers and was pulled out pretty darn quickly, but still, it's really happening now. And it's just madness. And I love it because people miss the subtle little points. Once we get past that and get things actually kind of in an orderly manner, it's time for me to hand off to other folks.
This is amazing to hear about all your experience and all these things that they might not be the sexiest things to talk about. They don't have to do with price action. They don't have to do with, an amazing cutting edge tech or something like that, when we talk about on the Cardano or in the blockchain space, it's always very exciting. But if you really think about it, nothing can work without actually, especially having to connect it with the real world. Like you really need to have this foundation of what you've talked about quite a few times around the minimum viable ecosystem. So you had this experience with IO, with all the Web2 previous experience that you had. Now, nowadays, today, that we're with zenGate, with commodities, with Sri Lanka. What is it that excites you the most, and how do you believe that this concept of a minimum viable ecosystem is actually something that is important to build this framework that we need so we can actually start having mass adoption and people that can actually start using the technology without even having to know what kind of technology or what it is that is happening underneath?
I'm excited about the Sri Lanka project when people just get business done and don't even realize they're using technology. One of the part that really excited me was when I was talking with Dan and with Sam about the opportunity is you have a huge number of these smallholder producers, just small. They produce, a few kilogram of tea at a time, getting kind of just taken advantage of by the big factories that you just have to sell at a terrible price into, because they have no control. They have no ability to actually get out of this cycle of sell to a big factory. I get my little pittance from it. But through this technology that Palmyra's got, the Palmyra has been built into it, we now have this ability to take the farmer, get their product into a place where it's, one, they're getting a lot more money. Two, we're moving up market. So the sort of this crux issue, what's the thing that has to change? I think we've identified it so far. We're still doing the research in the project, which is how do we get the rest of the world to agree that this is really good tea? Sri Lanka already has the Ceylon tea board. They're very protective of it, but it's a bulk thing. Yes, you can go to David's Tea up here in Canada. You can go to various different tea shops and get some Sri Lanka stuff, but there's no standard here. There's no way of really understanding it. What's nice to see is that in order to get to the next level, we can take a look at Palmyra, build in the capabilities that say, hey, listen, if it's a specialized tea, a specialty tea, what does it mean? What does that mean when I say it's a specialty tea? Well, it means that it's been checked out by someone who is, a certified taster, that they have a standard that they're adhering to, kind of like we see in other commodities. You get into the coffee market, not as formal, but you get into other markets that are extremely formal on what's going on there. But to watch how Sam and Dan are taking a look at the data, and you too, Theo, take a look at the data on the ground, bring in a specialty tea, and now a buyer, whether I be a consumer direct or a buyer at a tea shop, can say, hey, listen, I want to get this particular thing. And when it lands, it has that kind of, when you buy wine from Italy, you have the denominazione, the sticker that lets me know, hey, at least I know this followed some rules. That's really hard. The farmer at the other end has no clue, no ability to really impact anything. I mean, our informal numbers are that, they could, in theory, without changing much in the way of pricing, at least double their income. That's pretty freaking meaningful. I'm not looking for 1% to 2% change, but the fact that we could do this at scale, do it in Sri Lanka with the Sri Lanka tea, lift that up, go to a whole bunch of other countries and do tea. Similar process, obviously in country details, but to have that just start flowing, you can grow this market and let it scale itself. You get one person who's a certified taster, double their own income because they're going to be in demand. They're going to start to attract in the country more and more of these tasters are going to get certified, and it just kind of self-perpetuates. It's going to start this flywheel moving. And I don't think that we're going to have to push that flywheel too much, as opposed to trying to change the market of commodity tea. It's brutal. It's impossible. So I'm just excited that I'm actually really excited that we can, one, hide the technology, that no one has to see it doing anything. But when I get that seal of approval on the kilogram of tea that arrives at a tea shop, that I get that's really, really powerful.
The other thing as well, which is quite profound, is, and something Darrell's been really helping us with, is it doesn't just start and stop with specialty tea, right? Like, this is a commodity agnostic platform, and some of the ways that we're researching and trying to build out the different modules that Darrell's been helping us with is, like, how do you apply this same thinking and the same muscle when you enter a new region in a completely different commodity? Because a lot of these unstructured markets have very similar issues, right? The specifics of it may be different. Maybe it's a payments related issue. In our case, we're dealing with a quality related issue, but the same approach can be applied across different markets and different commodities. And that's the bit that really excites us, is like, how can we learn from this first use case around creating this flywheel, creating the structure, and deploying that again into the next place that we enter. So there's a lot of different markets already reaching out to us, and that's sort of what excites us. Like, we've got a blueprint, we're applying it, we're testing it and refining it. So yeah, that's been something really, really helpful for us, and something we're quite excited about as well.
Yeah, and the key thing here with this minimal viable ecosystem is we're doing it for several reasons. One is to get things moving, but unlike a minimum viable product, we're not just proving something out. We're actually building this minimum viable ecosystem for a very singular reason. One is we want to prove that it's valuable. I guess there's two reasons. The second, though, is we want to attract and align the partners that we need. So, for example, you mentioned it's a quality problem. I would perhaps recast that as a consistent quality problem, in that we know it's higher quality tea, but no one right now can definitively say, oh, and that is a tea of type X, which means that it might be high quality, but it's meaningless because we are all talking about different terms. Our partner Joyce with Cambridge Tea has that system that lets us, be a lot more consistent, on the overall taste profile, the color, the what do the leaves look, what kind of, what part of the leaves are there? Is it the full leaf tips? Is it the dust, which I learned I've been drinking some really, really bad tea. It's kind of disappointing. Maybe it's why I drink coffee. But it's taking a look at that. The missing part for this particular thing is a consistent way to portray the specialty nature of things, which by definition has to be at least a certain quality, but also what are the specialty aspects of it? If I want a particular type of tea, a yellow tea, I learned about purple tea. I didn't even know these things existed. But being able to use that, but take a look at another market. If we take a look at specialty rice or something, there will be something different. Whether they may have a good tasting system already, they may have a great way of characterizing this is a basmati type 10. I don't know. But where they may be missing, is to your point, Sam, is they may have trouble on the financing side. Turns out Sri Lanka actually looks, I think, reasonably fair on the financing and cash flowing, because they seem to move the monies fast to the farmer. I'm not sure how. I think we may find that the commodity tea producers aren't treated quite as fairly as we think, because it's easy to move small amounts of cash if you're keeping a bunch of it. So we haven't seen the markup levels and stuff like that of, hey, you get this at auction, but then what happens? But yeah, every market's got its own little pieces, and every ecosystem has its own little leverage points. And in this case, it's really taking, okay, how do we get, I thought it was really cool that the first, I was down at Rare Evo when Dan did his live demo, and the first store was not, it wasn't zenGate, it was Zen's Tea. So it's like you guys are partnered, just the whole name there. But for them to know that they're getting what they actually bought, so that they don't have to take all the risk themselves. You know, the system takes on some of the risk, which also means the system will get paid. The tasters, the overall specialty tea index will receive some. The Palmyra system, I would assume, takes a small portion of the fees, but it's there to move a lot of transactions through.
So I might just take a step back as well. You've been talking a lot about ecosystem building and ecosystem value. From past chats that we've had, you've talked a fair bit about this guy called Rod Adner,
Yep.
some of the frameworks he's developed. Yeah, like who is he? How has he influenced the way you use his frameworks, how you think through this stuff? Maybe you could just give a little bit of an overview about his work and how it's applied to your work for the rest of the community.
Yeah, he's got two really good books. Actually, our mutual friend Tony Rose introduced me to the book The Wide Lens, which, because of the work I've been doing supporting Boundaryless, which does the platform design toolkit, and they have ecosystem tooling, it really helps refine things. But Adner's work is really about two things. One is understanding your ecosystem, because ecosystems are all about doing something you can't do by yourself. So Apple has some ecosystem aspects to it. Some would argue, it's funny hearing some folks talk about Apple Pay being the winner of the ecosystems. They clearly don't go down to the US and see just how many payment systems there are. And Apple is just a player. They are not a leader in that payment system. They're just one of many, many players. But in ecosystem, you don't have the control you think. And Adner points out, where do you think you have control and where do you not? So his first book, The Wide Lens, again, Tony introduced me to that. The next book, Winning the Right Game, was really huge in aligning the tool set that we ended up producing as a company, and we've open sourced it. It's the Trust Continuum. He really got into the taking a look at the analysis of what is the real value architecture. So he actually goes through, and you hear Kodak as the ultimate, hey, failure of technology. They did all of the things. They did. They got into they got into doing printers because people will be printing photos and stuff like that. The real piece they missed in the ecosystem was the screen. That's what changed everything. The rest of it, better cameras everywhere, all of it. But he pointed out, in an ecosystem basis, why was that the case? Because it's all about value architecture. It's all about how are you adding real value to someone. So he created probably about half a dozen, maybe a dozen tools that we use all the time. That's in addition to the tools we got from the platform design toolkit. In addition, we do classic business model canvas, and some other tools that we've kind of just built up ourselves. But Adner was really the one who created the term. I think he created the term minimum viable ecosystem. And it's just fascinating watching what he's been doing.
Thank you very much. Chef, any questions on your side?
While Darrell was talking around, the books and the way that he's thinking around the minimum viable ecosystem, I was thinking about one of the very first conversations that I had with Darrell. And that had to do with, the minimum viable ecosystem. I think it was from MasterCard, if I can remember correctly. And you started talking about, how MasterCard really, needed a framework like that in order for it to use. And obviously there's a lot of people that most likely will be the first time for them, or the second maybe, that they hear about the minimum viable ecosystem and this whole idea. So maybe if you were to give us a little bit of this information so people can actually apply this framework into something that it's already out there, it already exists. So that way they can understand what we're trying to do and why having this kind of framework is actually really important in order for a project to be successful.
I'm one of the founders of the Trust Over IP Foundation, which is a not-for-profit part of the Linux Foundation, but we've been working on this marriage of governance and tech, which is all part of an ecosystem really needs an ecosystem governance framework. And I think it was probably Visa. The reason Visa, MasterCard was a fast follower of Visa, but D. Hawk, the gentleman who led the Visa initiative back when Visa was I don't think it was a not-for-profit, but it was just really, they called it a chaotic organization. It was, and that's the term, his term, order from chaos. Was basically no one had the authority to get the job done. They took people from, well, there was Barclay out of the UK, whatever the big banks were, but they would basically take the CEO appointed his 2 IC, his second in command, and would throw them all in, and you have competitors who want to cut and kill each other. Yet these people who created Visa were able to work through things because they realized that no bank was big enough to handle dealing with merchants. Cross a border, that becomes immensely more obvious. But they actually created, if you look at the original governance frameworks and the governance approach, is a really awesome book. I have 2 copies here because I was fortunate enough that when we did MemberPass, D. Hawk was one of the advisors of MemberPass. And we never managed, because he's now passed. But I was actually hoping to get his autograph because he's such an interesting man. But he managed to, through no control, he had no control, he had only influence, managed to build up the overall Visa network, which if you take a look at it, back then it was all about really the banks who were issuing the cards, the merchants who were accepting the cards, and then the cardholders. It was really an agreement that said, because I need to understand as a merchant, when you present that card thing to me, am I going to get paid? If anything bad happens, what are the rules? That's what governance tells you about. The minute you hear people say, well, I'm concerned about, do I get paid? Am I liable? If the minute liability comes in, there's money. There's money involved. You need to know at least rules that say, no, you're not. We're going to indemnify each other. But they set up all of those rules. There were probably, I think, in the world of Visa, 5 or 6 key roles in the beginning of the day for Visa. If you take a look at now at the governance framework that is Visa, Visa has now gone commercial. They went public, and it's a little bit different, just a lot more profit seeking. They were certainly making buckets of money before, but it's now a much more of a profit seeking org. There are probably 50 or 60 discrete roles. There's the card maker who has to actually manage the chip inside and how they do the crypto. There's the point of sale device, the acquirer who goes in and finds the merchant, whereas before it was the banks going in and say, hi, part of Visa, do you want one of these terminals? They have now fractured it out. If you were to print off all of their governance frameworks, you'd probably fill a large boardroom. It's that complex now, but it started out really, really simple. And because they had the informal trust, very highly placed people who were, second in command at major banks, or at least had the blessing of the CEO, when problems occur, and they will always continue to occur, they had ways of answering them quickly. I'm sure the first questions, if the first things that happened weren't handled consistently, but it was codified really, really regulate. What we've learned from that is the same stuff we've got to apply to any other ecosystem is, start small, make sure you don't, over-regulate things in your own governance framework. Forget regulators and, the SEC and stuff. I just mean in your own governance. Don't put too many rules in place until you know you actually need them. And Just make sure you got the key pieces covered.
That was excellent. Yeah, and I remember that visual that you showed with all the different actors in that ecosystem as well. So a quick one on my end. I'm a younger guy. I haven't actually, I've worked a number of years, but I don't have that depth of experience that you guys might have, right? And coming from the blockchain space as well, I think one of the things I've noticed is that we tend to forget that some of these tools or approaches have been applied before, right? We get really excited by the fact that everything's decentralized, infrastructure is being run in a decentralized manner, there's a governance system, and we think it's something completely unique and new and innovative. But in reality, if you look back at history, the Visa example is excellent to show that these approaches and these systems already exist. Like what are, for those that are from the digital asset space in our community, like what do you have to say to them around what are some examples you can point them to so they can better understand how history's played itself out so that we can do a better job in today's world?
I think the best way to look at it is there's a principle called Chesterton's fence. Chesterton's fence is the idea is that if you're going to remove a fence that you find, first figure out why it's there. And there's a really good Sketchplanations does an awesome job of. They have I don't have it handy, but they have a cartoon of two people talking beside a fence and saying we should tear this fence down. The camera is up and it can see over to the next hill where there's a whole herd of bison. Kind of funny. It's a Cardano thing, but there's a whole herd of bison. They're going to tear. They don't know why the fence is there. If you take a look at the earliest days of blockchain, especially with anything, with just cryptocurrency, there were no rules of any kind. There was no quote governance. But quickly, you take a look at the things that have been built. They're looking a lot like the financial system. And you have to look at the financial system. Well, why was the financial system created? Many of the reasons were very good to protect us from each other, to protect us from bad actors. A lot of the systems that were also there as rent seeking, which actually they got fat on things and they do the wrong thing. But if you look at the why is that rule or why is that institution in the way, why are they there? You may come up with a reason it's like, maybe we need them. Like maybe I shouldn't remove that one. But again, many of them might just be there because they're enriching each other and it's just rent seeking. But I think the nature of techies, and I was a, tech blind CTO when I first started my search and rescue company, thinking tech would solve 95% of all problems. I'm completely upside down on that now, by the way. I think it's critical. We have tech. It's 5 to 10% is what it can solve. Without governance, I don't care what the tech can do. And another example, I also might have said this about Visa and MasterCard and Amex and China Union Pay, whatever. We hear in the blockchain space about, hey, how many transactions per second does Visa do? And we do more, or we do some pittance of that. It's not the transactions per second that makes Visa successful. If you took away all of their patented technologies, they have a lot of patents, a lot of really unique ways of doing things, and they had to get running again. There's lots of technology solutions that they can use. If you took away their governance, that is the IP that would kill them. If they don't have their governance, the governance construct is the intellectual property that makes Visa so valuable. So it's the technology is sort of I would give the advice of make sure you know what barrier you're trying to tear down and what you're going to need to control, because the tech is just anyone can get an edge. They are going to take the edge. And if your tech is really, really fast, you're going to fail even faster, which actually my search and rescue and then the subsequent company, we learned that pretty quickly. We made our customers look bad because their processes were so weak that when we automated things, they fell down. So it's hard. Like they just fell apart. They didn't realize if you got answers within a sub-second that you were taking 20 minutes before, that the next step in the process was already broken.
This is actually very interesting to hear from you, because while you're talking, there's all these things that are coming in my head from, the past 5 years that we've been in the Cardano ecosystem and in the blockchain space in general. But, I like to use Cardano because that's what I've been doing for the last 5 years. And I do have a lot of references. When now we, again, throughout the last 5 years, at least, we've seen a lot of moving pieces, a lot of things happening. such as, a great partnership from IOG with, the Ethiopian government, for example, or with the Georgian wine, or with New Balance, or, this kind of really good relationships with this sense that is something different, that is, okay, we're tapping on the real world. So now we see all these projects, such as Palmyra, what we're trying to do with Sri Lanka, tea, and all the other commodities that are coming, and the other jurisdictions. What would be an advice that you would give to all, these smaller projects that for some reason maybe in their head are like, oh my God, we're not that big, or we need to have millions of dollars, or, an X amount of money so we can actually start and, go to an underserved country or community and start building a minimum viable ecosystem around the product or the solution that they're building. So what would be your advice to project like us, like Palmyra, and what we're trying to do in Sri Lanka, from your experience and your perspective and what you've seen so far?
I think the biggest advice piece I would give is start small, and ideally find a small but meaningful place to start. So if you take a look, I did touch upon when I was working with IO, I did touch upon the MOE project. It's a good sized project that is meaningful enough. It can make a difference. I'm not sure where it stands now. I haven't been with IO probably for about another 6 or 8 months. Whereas trying to tackle a huge country is too big. One of the reasons I really like the Palmyra project in Sri Lanka is it's also what I would call a greenfield project. There is nothing there in specialty tea. They really just have a marginal, if somebody does it, it's because they're a social media influencer and they're just or they've managed to push out a few kilos, couple 100 kilos, that's it. But there's no real market there. So you're creating a new capability where one doesn't exist, as opposed to trying to tear something else that's running down. That's really hard. You have the incumbents fighting you. You have they're probably making money, which means they're continuing to make money while they fight you. And I would rather see the smaller projects, but I also think what's really key, and I'm seeing this here with Palmyra with the zenGate project, is there's another step past the small project. It's okay, cool. We do a different commodity in the same country. Great. We do tea in another country and learn the subtleties there whilst growing the Sri Lanka specialty tea. That's a huge way to move. World Mobile is similar. It started out in a small area.
Tanzania, yeah.
Yeah. And now, you're hearing, nodes are being stood up. I think certainly in California, Utah. I'm sitting in BC going, man, I could light one up here. That's how you get the momentum going. But starting small, and that's also especially on the governance side, is start as small as humanly possible. Because when you start adding governance, and this is, I can just imagine the legal department at Visa just building their governance framework, how enormous it is. You end up with these interconnections and it goes exponential really quickly. So starting small is because you get you'll hear people talk about governance in the blockchain space, and I kind of giggle and shudder. There's a lot there in governance. Voting is not governance. Voting is an aspect of governance. The smaller you make it, the more likely it's not going to choke you out. If you create really rich, deep governance in the beginning when you really don't know what the problems are that need to be solved, you're going to choke out. So I would start small and don't be afraid of it. Own it, man.
Yeah, I think a lot of people confuse the fact that starting small means you have a small vision. Like you can have a really big vision and choose to fill, but I think, you have to get some wins at the end of the day.
Yeah, look at just, not the blockchain, but take a look at how did Elon Musk do Tesla? The only one he could do is do a roadster because it had to be ridiculously expensive, small volume, absolutely high ticket price, and very, very specialized market. He couldn't start anywhere else because the amount of capital required, plus the belief that he had to build up, was just absolutely insane. Plus, he's, generally speaking, a different person. But hey,
I've got one last question on my end. You've obviously been working with us for a few months. What other projects are you working on that you would like to share with the rest of the community? You've got certain things like Fund 11 coming up, where could be a great opportunity for some of the projects you're attached to get some proposals funded. Yeah, if you could go into some detail about what you're working on for the rest of the community to get behind and to support you as well going forward.
Yeah, I'm actually talking again. One of the projects that's near and dear to my heart is one that I came across when I was guiding the Atala team. It's helping Tony and Bart, reorient how Atala's doing. It's just killing it. It's doing a great job right now under David Harding. But I met the team from Aho. This is a Maori project out of New Zealand, Aotearoa. And what they're doing is creating a system that helps anchor Indigenous identity and cultural history, which applies not only there, also applies here. I've actually got some outreach to some local, well, across Canada, but same country, very far, but to actually see how we can start building. It's one that it got massively downvoted because it's it's a relatively big project. I mean, I'm guessing that's why I got downvoted, or people just didn't like us. Who knows? That's one. There's an interesting project. It has nothing to do directly with Cardano, with Catalyst. It's more for decentralized identity. Is one of the groups I'm working with is actually a really sharp top-level domain registrar out of Canada. So they are actually a not-for-profit that does the .ca domain. They actually run software that actually New Zealand is running, Ireland is running, and other places. But the reason we're working on it is when you're in the decentralized identity space, you have these decentralized identifiers, which we'll be using in Palmyra, much like addresses, except they're nice that they separate. You can actually have some privacy. But the decentralized identifiers, if I issue you a credential, let's say it's for Palmyra, okay? I have a taster who issues a credential that says, this is, I say this. How do I know you're actually one of the valid tasters, not some scammer in Sri Lanka? Or my joke is, if it's a driver's license I've received, how do you know it's actually the province of British Columbia where I live? Or it's some high school student, because damn, I would have done this if I was in high school, is selling me fake driver's licenses for $25 a pop. I have to be able to take that decentralized identifier, that did, and go back to a registry to find out, hey, who's got the list of driver's license things? Who's got the list of certified tasters? Who's maintaining that list? In our case, we are sort of moving towards the answer for the tasters. In the case of provinces in Canada, states in the US, we already have answers on that. There's actually associations kind of that are by no means regulated, but they're the de facto keepers of the keys, really. I want to be able to get the answer from those. And actually, if you look at how do I do this, and this is where it was sacrilegious to many of the decentralized identity folks, DNS is really good that way. You'll hear horror stories about DNS. People will give stories, the domains being taken away. I'm like, really? Find me a recent news article where you actually can point at it and say, no, there were mistakes made. Yes, in the beginning of the internet, 30 years ago, yeah, a lot of mistakes were made. Canada's domain was run from an Excel spreadsheet for 6 years. Yeah. I mean, it was informal. But I need to back up to this whole, how do I know that we have a Palmyra certified taster doing the thing? Well, we're going to need this thing called the trust registry. So I spent an inordinate amount of my time as a volunteer at the Trust Over IP Foundation on that. I don't know that there's any Fund 11 work there ahead of us for now, but it's something, who knows? We may think on that and see what other people think. But that's one that's got me excited because it applies directly to every single project I touch. How do I get the list of who is and who is not real?
We picked up your brain for quite a while now. We got a lot of information around your background, around the minimum viable ecosystem. What are some of the projects that this has already applied to, and what can happen, later down the road? I just want to close with any final thoughts that you might have. And what I would like to also, mention here for our audience, and that's something that it's really exciting to me, is that what we're building through the Atala proposal from Fund 10, this playbook, this framework, this blueprint that we're going to build and have been building for a while now, but we're going in December in Sri Lanka, to do more workshops and work on that a lot more. that what excites me is that it will be for all the projects on the Cardano ecosystem. We will make it available so that way people can actually take this work and apply it for their own projects. So I just wanted, to point that out, that through this amazing conversation with you, we got so many different pieces of information. But I think a really important thing is that all that will be available, your knowledge and the knowledge that we're going to get from our trip and the workshops that we're going to be doing, this is all going to be available for the Cardano community. And I think that's something really, really exciting, and hopefully will empower other projects or people to go and do, what, their own, bring their own projects to life and build their own ecosystems around it. So any final thoughts, Darrell?
And I really appreciate that, you raising that, Theo, because all too often we tend to, keep these things secret with it would be everyone else's success. And it's not going to undercut, zenGate. It's not going to undercut Palmyra for someone to use a similar process to, I don't know, do some kind of a gold-backed coin and use a similar governance approach. The fact that we're operating in the open is one of the reasons that I wanted to partner with you folks, is because for us to learn in the open also shows people, hey, you don't have to have all the answers to get moving.
Yeah.
You have to know you're going in the right direction, that you're going to learn, and you're going to adjust when you have to. And I think that's probably the biggest thing that the people who watch us do this can take. But then, run with the frameworks, run with the tooling, and just do it.
One last thing, Darrell. So for those that want to reach out, connect with you, pick your brain potentially, whether that's in a formal way or an informal way, where can people reach you? How can they get in contact with you? How could they potentially collaborate and work with you, whether that's today or in the future?
It's easy to find me certainly on Twitter, X, whatever we call this thing, just Darrell O, or search up Continuum Loop, search up Trust Continuum, Minimum Viable Ecosystems, or Trust Over IP Foundation. You'll find me, as well as other folks who are doing very, very similar type of thing in various different domains. But always happy to throw a bit of time at something. I'm a big believer that, hey, if what a project gets out of an hour moves them in the right direction, and I never see or hear from them again, hey, cool, that's cool. I'm not expecting anything. I just want to be able to share. But definitely, once things get down and dirty, happy to throw in and help, again, bring a little bit of order from that chaos.
We've had the luxury of a number of hours with Darrell. I've lost count at this point, and it's been phenomenal on our end. So he's been a great advisor and a support of the project. So for anyone that's looking to understand how this stuff works and how their pieces fit together for their own project, I definitely recommend reaching out to Darrell. We'll make sure the links in the video below. It's always a pleasure speaking to you and picking your brain. You've got such a deep expertise in this space that I just love learning from you. And there's some book recommendations in there as well for those of you who like reading. We'll make sure we put those links as well.
Well, I appreciate that. It's been a lot of fun, and we're really just getting started too.
Oh, yeah, this is just the first of this Fireside Chat series that we're going to do with Darrell and with other experts from our ecosystem. Darrell, I can't wait until we have you back on this show so we can talk about all that stuff that we're gonna be building together. So thank you so much for this first appearance on this show, and we're really looking forward to talk to you again pretty soon. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks for the time, guys.